The mess hall fell silent when Lieutenant Reyes stepped inside. Every eye tracked her across the room, but no one spoke. Private Jenkins, who once made jokes about her scars, now sat rigid at his table, his tray untouched. The rumors had spread quickly. Phantom was here, hiding in plain sight as a supply and maintenance officer. She wasn't just another face behind the logistics desk. This was the same soldier who extracted surrounded comrades under fire in Kandahar, the ghost of Operation Blackstone, classified North Africa extraction, whispered about in training. The base was only beginning to understand what it meant to share space with a living legend. Recognition, when it finally arrived, didn't come with applause or speeches. It settled instead like an invisible pressure, rearranging every interaction around Lieutenant Reyes. Jenkins remained frozen at his workstation after the general's visit, replaying the words in his mind. Colonel Reyes, call sign Phantom. He barely noticed the air thickening, every breath edged with new awareness. Across the bay, Master Sergeant Wilkins caught Reyes' eye as she passed. He shifted to parade rest, almost unconsciously. Wilkins had been around longer than most of the officer's acknowledgement was brief but unmistakable. A silent nod from one who understood what real authority looked like. The gesture rippled outward, subtle but contagious. The supply office fell into step. Corporals straightened up when Reyes entered, and the usual idle chatter vanished. Paperwork requests landed on her desk early, signatures crisp. A young airman, who'd once grumbled about delays, now checked every form twice before turning it in. In the motor pool, Jenkins watched a veteran warrant officer straighten his posture as Reyes approached the fuel logs. The officer didn't say anything, just made sure his hands were clean before handing over the clipboard. Around her, even the smallest habits changed. Voices dropped, backs straightened, and the usual shortcuts disappeared. Private First Class Kim tracked Jenkins down in the parts storage room. They say she spent 3 days pulling a Delta team out of Al-Shirkat, Kim whispered, clipboard trembling. That her file has medals nobody's allowed to talk about. Jenkins stared at the rows of hydraulic fittings, realizing that Reyes's encyclopedic knowledge of parts came from necessity, not just training. The battalion XO started appearing by Reyes's workstation more often, coffee cup in hand, asking about supply chain protocols. The conversations were short, always professional. He never addressed her by anything but rank, but the intent was clear, making sure she had what she needed, without ever drawing attention. Medical records, once a source of idle curiosity, took on new meaning. The thin scar across her collarbone matched shrapnel wounds described in classified reports. The jagged line on her left forearm fit the pattern of a knife fight Jenkins had only heard about in rumor, where, once these marks were dismissed as oddities, now they became evidence. Senior NCOs altered their routines. Master Sergeant Cruz from Logistics stopped telling jokes in the break room when Reyes entered. The supply officer he'd once called desk warrior now received the same silent nods reserved for those who'd seen combat up close. In the latrine, Jenkins overheard 2 sergeants arguing in low voices. That's why the rotors always spun up faster when she signed off, one said. Phantom doesn't tolerate mistakes twice. The other just turned the faucet, letting the water run hard. At sick call, the nurse who used to joke about cat scratches now handed Reyes the blood pressure cuff with both hands, careful not to touch her scars. The physician assistant didn't ask questions. During night watch, Jenkins found himself counting the security lights across the tarmac, thinking about how many nights Reyes had spent staring at similar lights in places no one wanted to remember. The silence that followed her wasn't about fear anymore. It was the hush that settles when people finally see the truth in front of them and start to look at what they once overlooked. Jenkins began to notice details he'd missed before. The scar on Reyes's right forearm, which he'd once dismissed as a scrape from warehouse shelving, now drew a different kind of attention. During a routine inspection, Senior Airman Cho leaned in close enough for only Jenkins to hear. That one, he said, nodding toward the pale line snaking from wrist to elbow, came from pulling people out of burning vehicles under fire. She didn't leave until everyone was out. The story settled between them, changing how Jenkins looked at every mark. The base's mood shifted whenever Reyes rolled up her sleeves. In the mess hall, the kitchen staff fell quiet as she reached for a tray, the latticework of scars on her hands visible for the first time. No one made jokes anymore. The marks that once invited whispers now commanded respect. Jenkins caught Private First Class, Kim, glancing at the raised burns across Reyes's palms. Friction burns, Cho had explained, from fast roping down nylon cords while carrying wounded teammates. The medics recognized the pattern instantly. These weren't the result of an accident, but the physical memory of missions that left no room for hesitation. Sergeant Major Cole offered the only explanation Jenkins needed. One morning, as Jenkins watched Reyes push her hair back, exposing a thin, neat scar above her eyebrow, Cole spoke without looking up from his paperwork. "Field surgery," he said. "She cut herself open and stitched it shut after the medevac was delayed. Kept 3 others alive until help came." There was no embellishment, just the facts. The story passed quietly through the ranks, and with it, the understanding that every scar carried weight. After that, every corner of the base from the barbershop to the medical bay fell silent when her scars surfaced. The barber no longer asked if she wanted them covered. The medics stopped with the small talk. Even the supply clerks, who once joked about office warrior injuries, now double-checked her paperwork with a kind of reverence. The marks on Reyes' skin weren't just reminders of pain. They became proof of what she'd survived and the lengths she'd gone to for others. Her scars became badges, visible evidence of sacrifice that needed no explanation. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Where once there had been careless words and sidelong glances, there was now a quiet respect. Jenkins noticed it everywhere, in the way people stepped aside, in the way conversations paused, in the way the air changed when Reyes entered a room. The base had learned how to read the language of scars, and it changed how they moved around her. In the mess hall, the hierarchy shifted without a single word spoken. The chow line parted naturally when Reyes approached, privates and specialists, leaving a respectful gap as she moved forward. No one needed to be told. The new unspoken order was clear. Corporal Meeks, usually loud about keeping the line moving, simply nodded as Reyes passed, his voice dropping to a hush. Her usual table in the far corner became a boundary no one crossed. Even officers who technically outranked her in her cover role kept their distance, waiting for an invitation that never came. An empty chair always stood ready beside her, a silent sign that this space was hers. The seat faced the door, positioned just so, and no one ever moved it. Senior officers adjusted their routines. Colonel Vick stopped lingering in the area after his staff meetings when he noticed his people glancing over at Reyes instead of paying attention. Captain Wynne rerouted his path to the salad bar, careful not to pass behind her during lunch. These weren't formal rules, but the kind of changes that spread quickly once people understood who was really in their midst. The kitchen staff responded in their own way. The cook started her coffee before she arrived, pouring it black and setting it at the edge of the counter with exactly half an inch left at the top. The line at the steam table slowed just enough for an extra ration to slide onto her tray when no one was watching. These gestures weren't reserved for high-ranking brass. They were a quiet tribute, a way of showing respect to someone who had earned it far from the safety of the base. Jenkins picked up on the details. The plastic forks vanished from Reyes's place setting, replaced with metal silverware wrapped in a napkin. When she reached for hot sauce, there was always a full bottle waiting. The changes weren't announced, but everyone adapted. A staff sergeant new to the base tried to claim Reyes's table once, only to be stopped by 3 senior NCOs who didn't need to say a word. From then on, even visitors recognized the boundaries. Other habits followed. Maintenance crews made sure the light above her seat never flickered. The trash cans near her table were emptied more often than the rest. Officers' conversations quieted when Reyes was nearby, the usual complaints and gossip replaced by talk of equipment and schedules. Even the cashier at the end of the line stopped making small talk, sliding her receipt face down on the counter in silent acknowledgement. The rules of the mess hall weren't written, but everyone learned them quickly. The shifts in behavior, the subtle displays of respect, and the silent boundaries all pointed to the same truth. Reputation could change the order of a place overnight. As the day wound down and the mess hall emptied, The weight of unspoken respect lingered in the air, carrying with it new stories and questions that would follow the troops long after the lights went out. In the barracks, rumors moved faster than orders. Jenkins lay in his bunk, eyes fixed on the ceiling, while voices drifted through the thin walls. Someone was whispering about North Africa, how Phantom had once crossed miles of desert, guiding her team by the stars after their extraction plan fell apart. The details changed with every retelling. Some said she'd carried a wounded operator for 2 days without rest. Others insisted she'd held off an entire squad alone, buying time for an airlift that almost never came. The truth stayed locked behind classified files, but the stories grew with every shift change. In the latrine, the talk shifted to scars. PFC Cho swore the mark on Reyes' neck came from shrapnel during a firefight outside Kandahar. A mechanic countered that it was a grenade, not a bullet, and that she'd patched herself up in the field. Neither had seen her file, but both spoke with the certainty of those who wanted to believe. The sinks ran, voices dropping to a hush when footsteps echoed down the hall, then rising again as soon as the coast was clear. The night shift in the motor pool became a breeding ground for stories. A crew chief claimed he'd seen the after-action reports. Reyes was the only one who came back from Operation Blackstone with every name on the manifest accounted for. A supply clerk said she spoke enough dialects to pass for local in 3 countries. No one challenged these stories. Veterans knew that the wildest rumors about special operators often hid a core of truth. Jenkins picked up fragments everywhere. A staff sergeant told of Reyes locating a hidden weapons cache by smell alone, her senses honed by years in the field. A corporal described the time she'd fixed a helicopter's transmission under fire, hands steady even as rounds cracked overhead. The stories grew with each telling, but the core remained: she survived what should have been impossible. Laundry runs at midnight revealed the divide. Junior enlisted swapped tales of firefights and rescues, voices urgent and low. Senior NCOs listened, silent, never confirming or denying what they'd heard. Once, a private asked Master Sergeant Wilkins if the rumors about Blackstone were true. Wilkins just shook his head. "Some people aren't what they seem," he said, and nothing more. The silence that followed was answer enough. Jenkins stopped trying to separate fact from fiction. He watched Reyes in the hangar, her movements precise, her attention fixed on the task at hand. The stories might have been exaggerated, but her quiet competence made every one of them seem possible. Around her, rumor became respect, and respect became ritual. No one needed a memo to know that something had changed. The adjustments began quietly, with no official word, but everyone recognized the new order. General Thornton's words never appeared in writing, but their meaning shaped the base within hours. The directive was clear. Lieutenant Reyes would remain in her role as maintenance officer. Her cover and her preference matched, and the general's expectation was unmistakable: her true identity would stay classified, her operational history left unspoken. The responsibility for this secrecy fell to everyone who had heard the command. No one needed a memo. The discipline of silence was enough. The first changes settled into routine. Supply requests bearing Reyes' name moved to the front of the queue. Where other officers waited for days, her paperwork cleared in hours. The maintenance bays stayed open late, when her diagnostics ran past shift change. The motor pool sergeant never explained the extended hours, and no one asked. The adjustments weren't tracked or announced. They happened because those who understood operational security saw the necessity and responded without question. Radio protocols shifted almost overnight. Operators avoided using her unit designation on open channels. Briefings referenced the lieutenant or maintenance instead of names. Major Nguyen, who once called every officer by name, now defaulted to titles and stations, his tone careful but never forced. These weren't rules written down, but habits that spread through the ranks until everyone recognized what was at stake. Beyond these, the base adapted in quieter ways. The personnel office scrubbed certain records. The armory ensured her assigned weapon was always ready, no questions asked. Patrols lingered just a little longer near the maintenance bays, and the security cameras along her route received attention before any others. The medical staff scheduled her appointments at odd hours and never lingered over her file. In the mess hall, cooks plated her meals with gloved hands, and utensils were set aside for her use. Each of these actions was small, but together they formed a pattern protection through discretion, respect shown by keeping her cover intact. No one ordered these changes. There was no formal acknowledgement, no public mention of her past. The general's unspoken command moved through the base like a current. As far as anyone outside the circle knew, she was just Lieutenant Reyes, a maintenance officer. Those who knew more kept their distance, their silence a measure of respect and understanding. The legend of Phantom operated best in the background, shielded by the discipline of those around her. Jenkins noticed how the rhythms of the base bent to accommodate her presence. The paperwork, the extended hours, the careful word-seach was a signal, subtle but unmistakable. He watched as people adjusted, not out of fear or obligation, but out of a shared sense of what was necessary. The base didn't talk about the general's order, but everyone followed it all the same. Night settled over the hangars and maintenance bays, the routines of the day giving way to the quiet of after-hours work. It was in those long, silent stretches that the meaning of the general's command became most visible in what was said, but in what was left unsaid, and in the care with which everyone moved through the space Reyes occupied. At 300, Jenkins found himself pacing the maintenance bay, the quiet broken only by the distant hum of generators and the clatter of a dropped wrench. Reyes was there, alone at the test bench, sleeves rolled, her focus locked on a set of standard night vision gear. The green glow from the diagnostics panel threw shifting patterns across her hands, catching on the scars he used to joke about. She worked in silence, cycling through test slow light check, battery inspection, a careful alignment of the lens assembly. Every movement was measured, deliberate, with the kind of precision Jenkins had only seen in armorers, prepping equipment for missions that didn't make the morning brief. He watched from the edge of the doorway, unsure if he should interrupt. Reyes didn't look up. She adjusted the gain control with a small, practiced twist, then paused, eyes narrowing as she examined a flicker on the display. When the unit failed to calibrate, there was no frustration, just a quiet efficiency as she opened the housing, checked the board, and made a repair with steady hands. The scars on her forearm caught the instrument light again, and Jenkins realized those marks weren't random. They mapped a history of work done in places where mistakes meant more than paperwork. She logged the repair, her typing quick and methodical, before finally acknowledging him. "Night watch?" The question was flat, but not unfriendly. Jenkins nodded, suddenly aware of the difference between his own spotless uniform and the story written across her skin. She handed him the recalibrated unit. "Check your seals before you stow it. Sweat will eat the O-rings." The advice was simple, practical, just one professional to another, no hint of superiority. Jenkins glanced at the workbench as she packed away her tools. There wasn't a single stray part, no smudge on the optics. Every wrench and brush returned to its place. He recognized the discipline habits formed in environments where order kept people alive. She didn't linger, only paused at the exit to power down the lights with a slow, deliberate motion. Jenkins understood what that meant. A reflex honed in places where a careless switch could draw attention no one wanted. After she left, Jenkins stood for a moment, in the green-tinged silence. The maintenance log showed 14 units serviced, all during hours when most officers would be asleep. He touched the bench, feeling for some trace of her presence, but found nothing but clean metal. That's when the realization settled in. Reyes wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone here. She was doing the work as she always had, holding herself to standards that didn't change with the job title or the rumors in the barracks. For Jenkins, it shifted something fundamental. The mockery had faded weeks ago, but now he understood why respect for Reyes ran deeper than her reputation. It was in the way she moved through the night quiet, precise, accountable. He saw that her real authority came not from stories or scars, but from the work itself. As he stepped back into the corridor, Jenkins caught the first hint of dawn through the bay doors, and the base began to stir with new purpose. The training yard took on a new atmosphere after the truth about Reyes settled in. Where recruits once slouched through morning runs, now back straightened, and steps found a steadier rhythm whenever she appeared along the track. Jenkins noticed the difference in the way the platoon moved, no more half-hearted shuffling or whispered complaints. When Reyes jogged past, her stride matched textbook patrol pacing, and her breathing never wavered. She wore a weighted vest, the kind used by special operations, but made no show of it. Most didn't notice at first. The ones who did kept quiet, watching her set a pace that others tried to match. The effect spread beyond the track. Pull-up bars, once left empty after mandatory PT, became crowded with soldiers pushing through extra sets. Jenkins watched as Reyes worked through her routine strict pull-ups, palms out, each rep smooth and controlled. Her hands bore the marks of real use, the scars and calluses speaking to more than just gym time. No one counted her reps out loud, but everyone around her seemed to push for one more than usual. The drill sergeants didn't comment, but their silent nods toward Reyes said enough. Her habits shaped the expectations across the field. It didn't stop at running or pull-ups. On the obstacle course, Jenkins saw recruits watching Reyes scale the rope without using her legs, arms flexing with each controlled pull. The scars that once drew whispers now seemed like a map of experience, the kind that made others reconsider their own limits. Where recruits had once mocked the private who failed the wall climb, now there was a quiet respect. No one laughed when someone needed a second try. The tone had shifted. Effort mattered more than bravado. Swim qualifications changed too. It wasn't just about finishing laps anymore. After rumors spread about Reyes's waterborne operations, candidates watched the way she entered the pool, her sidestroke efficient, silent, and purposeful. A few tried to mimic her form, but none matched the smoothness of her movements. The lifeguards took note, but said nothing. Even the cool-downs felt different. Where most rushed through stretches, Reyes followed the prescribed operational routine, hitting each position with deliberate care. Jenkins found himself copying her sequence, holding each stretch a little longer, and saw others doing the same. The changes weren't discussed, but they spread fast, the way good habits do in close quarters. By the end of the month, Jenkins realized he'd adopted more than just a few of Reyes' habits. His run intervals mirrored hers, his grip on the pull-up bar matched her width, and his notes in the training log were more methodical. He wasn't the only one. Across the yard, the platoon moved with a new sense of purpose, each soldier quietly raising their own standards to match the example set before them. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Reyes never gave speeches or called attention to herself, but her presence set the bar. The recruits learned to watch, listen, and adapt, not out of fear, but out of respect for what real experience looked like. The yard grew quieter, more focused, as everyone learned to measure themselves by a different standard. It was in these moments between runs, at the pull-up bars, during the last stretch before chow, that the true lessons took hold. The platoon's energy changed, and Jenkins could sense it would carry over to every corner of the base, even to the places where old habits still lingered. Near the armory benches, the mood shifted as a group of fresh privates hovered around a newly cleaned M4, their voices pitched low. They watched Lieutenant Reyes at the inspection table, her hands moving with practiced certainty as she field-stripped an M240B. There was a brief exchange of laughter, the kind that never carried far, as one of the privates nudged another about the scar on her forearm, speculating, without much imagination, that it must have come from some routine accident. Jenkins lingered by the weapons rack, recognizing the pattern of scars for what it was. He knew the story behind that mark: Kandahar, a jammed 240, and 3 rangers pinned down until Reyes cleared the stoppage under fire. The privates didn't see Jenkins' approach. Their focus stayed on the easy target they thought they'd found. The squad leader, trying for a laugh, made a crack about office injuries. Jenkins cut in, his voice steady. "That scar's from Kandahar. She cleared a jammed 240, while others took cover." The words landed with more weight than he expected. The group fell silent, not sure whether to challenge him or back away. Across the room, Reyes continued her inspection without pause. She cycled the weapon's bolt in short, efficient motions, nothing exaggerated, just the kind of movement that keeps a machine gun running in real-world conditions. The armorers watched her work, saying nothing. By week 3, no one even questioned her method. She inspected weapons, fired tighter groups every time. The lead armorer had stopped double-checking her logs, and Jenkins noticed that Reyes logged her work with a pen on carbon copy forms, not the digital tablet everyone else used. Another habit from places where power outages and network failures were the rule, not the exception. The squad leader looked ready to argue, but Master Sergeant Cho appeared at the M4 rack. "Private," Cho said, his voice just above a whisper, "that lieutenant's cleared more combat stoppages than you've had days in uniform." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The armory logs told the rest of the story. Every rifle Reyes inspected performed above standard at the range. She checked details the manuals barely mentioned: firing pin protrusion, cam path wear, sight alignment from multiple positions. The armorers recognized the difference even if they didn't say it out loud. After Reyes finished her inspection, the privates dispersed without another word. Jenkins watched as the lead armorer accepted her paperwork without his usual scrutiny. There was a quiet shift in the room. Marksmanship instructors started reviewing the weapons she'd serviced, adjusting their lessons when recruits struggled, never saying why. Cleaning stations stayed stocked with new bore brushes when Reyes signed in, and the ammo handlers left the best magazines at her workstation. Small changes, but they added up. When a shipment of night optics arrived, the same privates who'd joked earlier made sure Reyes had first pick. They watched in silence as she rejected 2 units for subtle flaws in the diopter settings. Even the squad leader held the door for her on the way out, eyes down. Jenkins heard the armorer and supply sergeant talking later, voices low. "Every weapon she touches shoots true," the sergeant said. The armorer locked another inspection log in the drawer and nodded. In the armory, respect didn't need to be spoken. It was there in the silence, in the careful way questions were asked, and in the understanding that some lessons came without explanation. Unspoken questions filled the maintenance bay in the weeks after Reyes' reputation settled into the fabric of daily life. Jenkins noticed how every conversation with her became more deliberate, each interaction shaped by the awareness of what should remain unsaid. The supply clerks, who once swapped stories over paperwork, shifted their approach. "Mom, which lubricant would you recommend for high heat bearings?" Replaced the curiosity. They really felt no one asked how she'd learned to keep engines running in hostile conditions. Reyes responded with clear, technical answers, her voice steady, never revealing more than necessary. The same pattern emerged in the motor pool. Mechanics stopped asking about her past and focused on the immediate task. Best practice for night optic storage became the standard question, the phrasing careful and impersonal. She would explain the importance of sealing cases, checking for moisture, and calibrating before every use, her instructions precise and free of personal anecdotes. The real questions, the ones about long hours spent in the field, about what it felt like to wait for an exfil under a foreign sky, never left anyone's lips. Jenkins saw the subtle shift in the way people phrased their requests. The new protocol wasn't written anywhere, but everyone followed it. When a corporal struggled with a stubborn hydraulic fitting, he asked for Reyes' input on torque sequence, not about the scar on her hand. She demonstrated the correct method, her movements efficient, her explanations stripped of any reference to where she'd first used them. The lesson was always practical, never personal. Medical staff adjusted too. The physician assistant marked occupational hazard on Reyes' chart instead of probing for details about old injuries. The physical therapist focused on mobility routines, never asking about the origin of her stiffness. Each interaction respected the boundary between what was necessary to know and what was better left unspoken. Even outside the bay, the new language held. At the armory, the lead technician slid a rifle across the counter with a neutral. "Does this firing pin protrusion look nominal?" Reyes checked it, nodded, and moved on. The cook in the mess hall simply asked, "Coffee black as usual?" The librarian handed her technical manuals without comment. Every gesture, every word, showed a careful respect for her privacy. Jenkins realized that the questions Reyes answered most fully were those that helped others do their jobs better. She would spend as long as needed explaining a complex repair or reviewing a maintenance checklist, but she never let the conversation drift toward her own history. The mechanics learned to listen for the details. She did share those, became the new standard for how things were done. Over time, this careful approach spread to every corner of the unit. The language of the bay changed. Operational wear meant more than just equipment fatigue. It hinted at the kinds of stress only seen in combat. Field modifications needed no further explanation. The meaning was clear without anyone having to ask. By the end of the month, Jenkins understood what had changed. The most important lessons weren't in the stories Reyes never told, but in the way she answered only what mattered. When she spoke, people listened not for tales of the past, but for the rare clarity of her instruction. The weight of her silence became just as important as her words, and the unit learned to measure what was left unsaid. This new understanding settled into daily routine, shaping how the team worked together and how they approached every problem that came through the bay doors. Life at Ramstein settled into a steady rhythm as the months passed. The dual reality of Lieutenant Reyes maintenance officer by rank, phantom by reputation, became a quiet fact, shaping the routines of everyone who worked alongside her. The changes were easy to spot if you knew what to look for. Supply requests with her name moved to the top of the pile, and the maintenance bay stayed open late whenever her projects ran long. No one needed a reminder. The pattern repeated itself every day, as if the base had always run this way. Jenkins found himself acting on these new norms without thinking. He caught the shift when a new arrival asked why Reyes's paperwork always cleared first. Jenkins almost explained, but instead replied, "Priority systems," echoing the exact language he'd picked up from her. He noticed his own handwriting had changed, his logbook entries now as crisp and ordered as the ones Reyes kept. Each time he checked tools or updated inventory, he followed her sequence, methodical and precise. The habits had crept in quietly, and he wasn't alone. Around him, others mirrored the same discipline, their routines shaped by her example. The supply office adjusted too. Clerks learned to anticipate what Reyes would need, keeping a reserve of parts for the aircraft she worked on most often. When something was missing, they found a way to get it faster, sometimes before the official request even landed. These weren't written orders, just the result of veterans passing quiet advice to new arrivals. Keep her stocked, and things run smoother for everyone. In the armory, the shift was obvious. Weapons assigned to Reyes moved through inspection faster, and the armorers set aside time each week for her maintenance requests. They didn't cut corners elsewhere, but they made room in the schedule, understanding whose safety depended on the work. Maintenance protocols adjusted, with extra checks built in, where Reyes had flagged issues before. No one talked about it openly, but the standard had changed. Mess hall routines followed suit. The cooks prepared her coffee at the same time each morning, and the usual noise faded to a hush when she entered. Soldiers kept their distance, not out of fear, but from a learned respect. The silence around her table became another unspoken rule, spreading through the ranks without anyone needing to say a word. These patterns became the base's new normal. The routines weren't forced, they emerged naturally, shaped by the presence of someone whose standards left a mark. The adjustments, once small, became part of daily life. Officers and NCOs sought her advice on technical problems, and junior enlisted watched her movements, picking up habits they hadn't learned in training. Even those who never spoke to her directly adjusted their behavior, understanding that some lessons came from observation, not instruction. Jenkins noticed the effect most in himself. He stopped making jokes about things he didn't understand. He began to measure his work by the quiet efficiency Reyes brought to every task. Around him, others did the same, and the base ran smoother for it. The new normal wasn't about rules or regulations, it was about the quiet influence of someone who set the standard by living it, every day. This atmosphere of respect and careful attention spread beyond the bay doors, shaping how people treated one another in the smallest moments. It was visible in the way soldiers paused before speaking, the way they checked their work, the way they watched and learned from those who had earned their place. One afternoon in the motor pool, Jenkins set down his torque wrench and watched 3 new recruits snicker as a senior sergeant with a stiff gait crossed the concrete. The oldest private mimed a limp, drawing a round of quiet laughter. Jenkins walked over, his coveralls streaked with hydraulic fluid, and let his shadow fall across their workbench. "You ever carry a full pack through Kandahar with shrapnel in your leg?" Jenkins asked, his tone flat. The recruits froze, wrenches half raised. They recognized him, the mechanic who'd been there when the stories about Phantom first surfaced. The boldest recruit started to respond, but caught sight of the scars on Jenkins' hands. The pattern wasn't from engine work. It was the kind that comes from clearing jams under fire, from nights when silence meant survival. A few months earlier, Jenkins might have joined in. Now he just looked at the sergeant's retreating figure, remembering how the man favored his right side after medics dug shrapnel out in a field aid station. Jenkins shut the toolbox with more force than needed. "Walk a mile in those boots first," he said. Not loud, not angry, just certain. The recruits glanced at their own new boots, the leather still clean, the soles untouched by dust or distance. The effect was immediate. The laughter stopped. No one commented on the limp again. In the mess hall that evening, Jenkins overheard one of the recruits mutter a story about the sergeant's injury. The details were scrambled, but the point was clear. The mocking had ended, replaced by a quiet respect that didn't need further explanation. The lesson spread quickly. In the parts cage, a specialist's joke about a Clerk's hearing aid died when the armorer replied, "That's from Ramadilost, his hearing shielding a kid during a mortar attack." No one laughed after that. The phrase Jenkins used, "walk a mile," first echoed through the bay, picked up by NCOs and even drill sergeants. It wasn't official, but it stuck. The new standard was simple. Before you judge, consider what someone else has carried. Jenkins found himself repeating it without thinking. When a junior officer complained about a sergeant's strict inspections, Jenkins didn't look up from his work. "Walk a mile," he said, letting the words land. Across the bay, Reyes caught his eye and nodded in silent agreement. By the time the next round of replacements arrived, the lesson had become part of the unit's culture. Mockery faded, replaced by a careful respect for the stories behind every scar and every limp. Jenkins understood now that the most important lessons weren't written in manuals or posted on the walls. They were learned in moments of silence, in the way people changed how they treated each other, and in the understanding that what you see is never the whole story. This last lesson settled into the base quietly, shaping the way respect was given and received. It was a change you could feel in the air, subtle, but lasting, reminding everyone that valor isn't always visible, and judgment should wait until you know the truth. The real story of service at Ramstein wasn't marked by ceremony or applause. It was in the way Reyes continued her work, keeping the aircraft mission-ready, her presence shaping every routine and expectation around her. Jenkins and the rest learned to see beyond scars or rumors, recognizing that the truest strength often went unspoken. If this story of hidden sacrifice resonated, subscribe and share where you watch tonight. Every day, the respect Reyes earned came not from spectacle, but from the steady example she set, reminding everyone that the greatest acts of valor rarely seek an audience.